Let's take the working file My Timeline 2 and look at doing a little bit more of this customization. Now, one quick button on your timeline tools format is the ability to take off the detail. This little button here, Detailed Timeline, as soon as I click that, it removes all the detail and I get a very basic timeline. I see the tasks that I've added, there's little blue bars, but I have no information, and I see the start and the finish of the project. Not to mention little way markers for dates. Let's put back the detailed timeline so that I can see the task labels and I can see my callouts. Now we can control the date format with a little drop down. There's lots of pre-built different formats there, so that will control how you see these dates. That's the default, but it may be that to try and save some space, maybe I go for Jan 28, which would be abbreviated month and a day with no year. So if I choose that, then all my dates change to that format you can see here, October 18 to November the 1st. The year's completely been removed and we have an abbreviated format. Maybe that's too abbreviated and I want to include the year. I may go for that format and I get a longer format here. I can decide whether I see the time scale itself. So that's these little markers here currently for each week. If I take that tick out by just choosing it, I don't get those little markers. Also in the date format, if I take off today, I don't see the today line. I don't see it anyway because my project isn't currently happening anywhere near today. So I could put that back and I could remove the task dates. And then I don't see any dates against any of the phases, so the callouts, or any of the individual tasks. I have to then hover to see any information. So those are the controls I have over the date within my timeline. How to display it and whether I see it for today, the task dates, or the timescale, which in my current Zoom is every week. So I put those back by simply choosing them from the show hide option. Then I get all the information. But it's just all about customization. If I don't want to see them, I turn them off. I do want to see them, I turn them back on. So anything to do with the dates is in the date format drop down. You can choose the format for your dates and you can decide which of your dates you want to see. So the task dates, so the date of each task, today's date, if your project falls in today, and then the time scale, which in my current Zoom would be the week commencing dates. Now, as well as the ability to control the formatting of the date and which dates you see, you can decide on a date range. Now, this will become more useful when we can create multiple timelines, but for the moment, I could restrict the view of this particular timeline by choosing the date range tool. The default is always the start and the finish date of the entire project, so the timeline will try and display the whole project. But I could set custom dates. Maybe I'm only interested in the first week in November. What happens in the first week in November? So I use the drop down calendar to take me to the first week in November, which is actually going to be the 30th of October until the 5th of November. Okay, my timeline is then restricted to that date range, and I can see it starts October 30th, finishes on November the 5th. Now my timeline markers are daily because the zoom is so much closer. I can see more information about the tasks, and my summary task now appears to cover a wider span because I'm looking at a shorter date timeline. So that's using the date range capability. Now, if you imagine you can create a number of timelines, you could perhaps have a separate timeline for each week, dependent on the size of your project, obviously. Or you may just want to pick on a couple of weeks or maybe a particular month. It all is driven by your requirements and your project. Do you have a 2-year project? Do you just want to look at 3 months in your little summary? Do you have a 2-week project and you just want to look at 2 days because there's a lot of things happening? You're completely in control. So I've restricted myself to the first week of November. The timeline is then only showing me the first week in November. So with our dates, we have the ability to filter by a set date range. We define that date range and to decide what we see as far as dates go, because we can control whether we see the dates of the tasks, today's date, the timescale being driven by the zoom that you're currently looking at, and the format of the date when it's used within your timeline.